David L. Parker was a Minnesota-based occupational physician who, throughout the span of his career, focused largely on the atrocities of child labor throughout the world. Born outside of New York City, Parker never had to do much work even in his teenage years because he was born to such a financially well-endowed family. Instead, most of his photos from these years are of him with a brownie strung around his neck, taking photos of the things around him. Unfortunately, however, photography remained merely a hobby for him, and he began studying public health and later received his master's degree in that same field. Later in the 1980s, he began working for the Minnesota Department of Public Health, and he focused mainly on improving working conditions for youth laborers, particularly young children or teens working on their families' farms and fields. And he is also an occupational physician. His first foray back into the world of photography was in 1992 in Mexico City. He first came to that city at the bequest of a cousin, and he made a wager with himself. If he could take 4 good photographs within a month, he would eventually take a leave of absence from his job, and he would become a full-time photographer. So he hit the streets. This is the first photograph that he took while he was in Mexico. Of course, almost all of his photos are black and white predominantly to contrast the subject with the background. I didn't have a clue. I didn't know how large the problem was or what it really meant. I knew virtually nothing, but I think that's true of most things worth pursuing. You don't know what you're getting into until you get into it. If you knew, what would be the great interest? David Parker. Of course, as soon as he hit the streets, there were several problems that he saw affecting these children who did anything from cartoonish, carnival-style working, selling fruits, or even selling cigarettes and cigars. Firstly, there were the gangs. The gangs would harass these children, take the earnings that they were trying to get for themselves and for their families, and would often abuse the children. Secondly, starvation. They didn't have enough money to support themselves or their families, and they were often turned to searching in the streets for food, or even in dumpsters or in the gutters. And finally, they were vulnerable to diseases, exposure to the elements like extreme heat and cold, and ill-intentioned adults who would sometimes want to sexually assault them or take their money. About 6,000 homeless children live in Guatemala. Although the Guatemalan government has pledged to treat street children more humanely, these children continue to suffer from extrajudicial executions, arbitrary detention, and other abuses. Of course, Guatemala is not alone in this issue, but it is extremely exacerbated there. In this picture, you see the tin miner in Bolivia. David Parker actually managed to crawl through the tiny tunnels and get in to where only a child could fit and take this photograph. Of course, it raises the question, what is a child? When does child labor become adult labor? Is it when a child is forced to take on the responsibility of caring for their entire family, of being the breadwinner, of throwing themselves into these tiny tunnels to make enough money to survive? Or is it when they're forced to fight for their country, even though they're completely unwilling or unable? In this picture, the child combatant in Sierra Leone, David Parker was actually volunteering in Sierra Leone to help fit prosthetics for children who lost limbs or digits due to the Civil War. Is this what makes a child adult, fighting for the country? Or is it when they become old enough or able to sell their own bodies for money, to support themselves or to support their families? Of course, this is no easy job. It shows that he had an extreme amount of dedication. He's not getting rich. He has a sense of responsibility. He became a doctor in the first place because he has some basic sense of caring, says Tom Arndt, another documentary-style photographer who happens to be close friends with David Parker. He has also crawled into tin mines, posed as a clothing importer, and wandered through Nepalese brick kilns in order to obtain these images. all to form some sense of that he could do something to fix this problem. And that is how he weaponized his camera. Parker is not just an observer taking photos and capitalizing the misery of his subjects. Rather, in 1999, he founded a school in Nepal in the Sanghu village that provides complimentary education regardless of the socioeconomic status of the pupils. You could be of an upper division in a caste or the lower division. You could be poor, you could be rich, but you could still come to this school and receive an education and one free meal, regardless. Of course, there is some sign of progress, or rather dim it could be. As evidenced by the study led by Miwakana in 2010, the higher a household's income is, the higher the household's child's level of education and health will be. This might seem highly unfair, already setting disadvantaged children from poor families for even greater disadvantages. However, Parker has reported improvements in areas like Nepal, particularly in the rug-making industry. And places that he once saw employing 6-year-olds working in from dusk till dawn with a toxic environment, he's now seen the government crack down on this style of industry, and it's become more regulated. Of course, this problem will not be ended simply, but due to people like David Parker, it is gaining attention, and we might be able to do something substantial.